The word democracy appears repeatedly in Leaves of Grass, and Whitman's individualism can be identified with the American spirit. Is this a political poem? And there's a follow-up comment from Nathan Walker who says, actually, this poem envelops and extends beyond politics. So I thought we could talk for a second about what's political about.
Politics of Whitman.
Politics
okay, cool.
of Whitman.
Let's go to Eric, who has an idea. Politics of Whitman.
Yeah, and Eric and I were actually in a thread together about this very topic.
You were in a thread together. I mean, this is virtual stuff.
And Julia, I'm always very happy to thread with you. So I want to talk for a second about the birth of this poem as a poem.
But it's got to be quick.
Okay. Whitman's on a bus, and he's on and on the bus. We can see it in the shakes of his handwriting and from other notes we have. He writes down, "I am the poet of the body, and I am the poet," and something like, "I'm the poet of slaves and of the masters of slaves." And we begin to hear for the very first time the rhythm and cadence that will become Song of Myself. He rewrites this in such a way that he makes it clear he puts himself physically between the slave and the master of slaves. And Whitman, at this moment of crisis, at the moment of the center of the political crisis of America, becomes the poet of America. Now, yes, this poem does a lot more than talk about politics. But it's born at a moment of political crisis, and it is that crisis which brings his prose notes into poetry.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. That leads us to my posing the following question, which I'm going to ask around the table and elsewhere. Okay, so the question Yariv and Nathan asked is about the politics and the democratic impulse of this writing, and the question I have for you a little more narrowly is, what is it about the style of catalog and lists and unsubordinated lists and parataxis, to use that word, that is democratic? Is there a politics to style? Is there a politics to form? Modpost says yes. Can you elaborate, starting with Max? Then Amaris.
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you said, it already unsubordinated list, right? So there's no subordination. That's a pretty democratic.
And given what
ideal.
Eric just said about the origin of the poem, if there's no subordination, if you're an anti-slavery but you're not writing directly about slavery in a political kind of writer's sort of way, but you are writing, right, Eric, in a form that is defying subordination, you are anti-slavery, you are abolitionist, and you are standing on what most of us, all of us, would deem the right side of history, in that people in the United States, because we said so in our Constitution and our Declaration of Independence, need to be treated equally, and they need to be treated equally in the poem. Sorry, I riffed a little.
You got it.
Lists are, yeah, I got it. Lists are democratic. Dave, can you, Amaris, can you first add anything about why lists, a kind of writing, could be democratic?
I think we see here just such an effusive abundance of items, and that sort of speaks to an all-inclusiveness, both of the low and the high that he includes here. There's a lot of organic language in it, and also speaks to the discussion we were having previously about truth being from multiple perspectives. And kind of this idea, there is a line about explanation in Leaves of Grass, and the explanation he finds, I think, is a blade of grass or something very simple. And so in that sense, it's sort of that feeling of connection that Whitman has to his environment and to external things, and this ability to look around that sort of negates the possibility of a direct truth or absolute truth.
Exactly. So the aesthetic is he wants everybody and everything in the poem, and that's implicitly democratic, and the style bears that out. Emily Harnett, I'm surprising you by asking, but can you say one more thing about the politics of Whitman's style?
I think you guys covered it fairly well. But yeah, that all-inclusive style is ultimately just a democratic gesture, and you can map his stylistic choices almost directly onto a politics of, yeah, an egalitarian democratic politics.
We're going to turn to Lily for one more phone call, but the question that was arising earlier and in the forums about Dickinson's different approach, it doesn't make her anti-democratic, and it doesn't make her necessarily elitist. What it means is that Dickinson does not feel that her approach to aesthetics and life requires everyone crawling into the poem with her. So she is going to be exclusive in the most neutral sense of that term. That doesn't make her less democratic. It makes her style less about the communion of opposites as an inclusion in the poem. So elitist is not quite the word we mean, but in the Dwell in Possibility, she's saying a visitor's the fairest. She's basically saying that Whitman and the Whitmanian tradition is indiscriminate. Emily Dickinson is saying, I am discriminate. That doesn't mean that she's discriminatory. It means she is discriminate. If you want to do the work of understanding her poem, you get to come into the poem. And that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because once you're there and you do understand it, you're in. So,
I think that's a politics, by the way.
And that is a politics.